I'm Allison Jonjak, the Cranberry Outreach Specialist with the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension. These videos are the on-demand recordings of UW Extension and the Wisconsin State Cranberry Growers Association's virtual brown bag lunch series. These monthly sessions offer growers and researchers a way to share timely and relevant information. We hope you'll enjoy and continue to engage with us.
Hi, I'm Tom Lochner, the Executive Director of the Wisconsin State Cranberry Growers Association. We're excited to be a partner with Extension to bring you research-backed resources, tools, and tips to keep Wisconsin marshes productive and profitable.
Hand it over to you.
Okay. Well, thanks, Allison, and good afternoon to everybody, and happy Friday. Welcome to our July version of the Cranberry Brown Bag seminars. As I was putting together a newsletter this morning, I was thinking about how long it's been since we've actually met in person, and Tuesday was the first in-person event that we've had since the Wisconsin Cranberry Board met in person in Wisconsin Dells on March 17th, 2020. So it was good to see people face to face and get out, and I think most folks enjoyed it. And we are going to continue to use virtual platform because it just seems very valuable and efficient to deliver information to the grower community without requiring you to travel. And you can join us for an hour and then get about your day. So anyway, we're going to continue to do that, but we also have a live events coming up. The next big one is in August 11th at Whittlesey Cranberry for the WSCJ Summer Meeting, Field Day, and Trade Show, and we hope you'll all be there. We're looking to have a great show on a great property with a wonderful family who's excited about hosting the event. And I think also, just for members' knowledge, the WSCGA office is going to be back open and running under normal hours from 8:30 to 4:30. We're doing it now, but July 1st is the effective date that we're going to do that. Other than that, welcome you to it. Thanks to Allison and Leslie and Amaya and Pam for appearing, and everybody for helping out in putting these programs together. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Allison and thank her for all that she's been doing for us.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tom. And I appreciate everybody's flexibility as I'm going to be doing 3 different trial applications today. So I said we'll do the brown bag from the site, so I can just jump outside. But that has had a little hiccup in the connection on the way there. But still very glad to be here. And I guess the next 2 trials I'll be putting out will be fungicide ones. So I'm glad to hear from Leslie on fruit rot. Lots of, I guess today and these couple of weeks are go hours. So as we wait for that, Amaya, would you like to start to present a little bit on fertilizer and nutrient uptake, and we can take questions as they come? Beautiful.
Okay, so today I just put together some discussion points about fertilization recommendations for this season. And so just a summary, and I'm happy to answer specific questions after this. This is just sort of a prompt to get people to talk and to ask questions, and we can probably address some specific things that I've heard here and there that are going on in certain cultivars. So the first thing is, what are the general recommendations if your beds that look normal? What should you be doing in beds that look normal this year? So the first thing is just wait until bloom to start fertilizing with nitrogen. These are healthy beds that look fine. They have normal blooms. They don't have anything abnormal this year. And so this might already have happened for some of the hybrid cultivars, and I guess that we're getting there for Stevens. And so just wait until full bloom. The research, and I think I've said this, I don't know, 1,000 times already. The research that we did with looking at root growth show that the new roots will not start growing until about bloom time. So this is about the time where you start getting new roots that are going to be very efficient at uptaking those nutrients that you're incorporating through the fertilizer, and that's what you want. You don't want to put them before that. If uprights are still producing leaves and they're vigorously growing, So you see the uprights tend to be sort of tender, and they have a lot of new leaves that are fleshy, and they contain a lot of water. You need to wait to fertilize. If you put the fertilizers when those uprights are still vigorously growing and producing new leaves, that fertilizer is going to go towards continuing that vegetative growth, and that's really not what you want. So that is one indication. If you have a lot of new leaves, if those uprights are still vigorously growing, even after bloom, wait to put the first doses of fertilizer. What will be the ideal timing for applying the first doses of nitrogen? When most of the fruits have been set. And I know that this is sort of like a controversial recommendation, because all of you folks get nervous about it, that if you're not going to fertilize, the plants are going to abort the fruit. But again, if those uprights are growing, they look green, and they are still putting actively new leaves on the apical shoot growth, it means that they have enough. One of the good indications of those needing or being the point in which you want to apply that fertilizer is when you see that the uprights are stopping their elongations, and you start seeing the first signs of the formation of the terminal bud. When you start seeing that and you have your fruits that have been set, that is a good indication that that's the time to apply the fertilizer. If you're doing before that, you're going to keep encouraging more vegetative growth. So this is an old image of an article that I put several years ago, and I just like found it and brought it back. And I just wanted to show you, if you are in a situation like A, where you still have, some of the basal fruits in the fluorescence have set, but you still see, pretty vigorous growth and new leaves coming from up there. I hope that you can see my cursor. This is too early for the application of the first doses of nitrogen. When you see something like this, you can already see the fruit. You can see that the terminal bud, that rosette, is starting to set, and the uprights are not, they're slowing down. That is a good indication that that's the time for the first doses of fertilizer. Now, this is going to differ depending on which cultivar you are. Most of the hybrids are a little bit earlier than our traditional Stevens. So this is going to happen earlier, which means that you have to put the fertilizer earlier than with later cultivars. So this is one of the things that you should be looking at. How often and how much to fertilize? This is another common question. Research has showed that multiple small doses, between 10 to 15 units, each one of them, is preferred than to put in just one or two really big concentrations. Why? Because you're gonna get more out of that application. You're going to have more efficient uptake of smaller doses, separated, so several small doses than one big one. You're gonna get less leaching of those nutrients. And the other thing that I think is really important is that you want to watch how the vines are reacting to that fertilization. So if you put 10 to 15, and then you come a week after that and you put 10 to 15 again, and you still see that they're still needed more, they're not greening up, you come back with a little bit more. If you put a huge amount of them and the vines react and they start like growing like crazy, there's no way of taking it back. And during this period, it's not the fertilizer that is going to make that fruit grow. That's why it's important to split it in multiple lower concentrations of this, because what this fertilizer is going to do is going to help with the production of chlorophyll. That's where most of the nitrogen is going to go right now. And the chlorophyll is the compound that is producing photosynthesis and carbohydrates that are going to make that fruit grow. So at this point, we're having a lot of cell division happening in the fruit that is driven by temperature. It's warm, so that cell division should be really just going right now. If the vines are being properly irrigated, nutrient is not your main limitation to have a really good crop this year. Okay, this is not what is going to limit how much fruit you're going to set or how big those fruits are going to be. Under the assumption that those vines are healthy, they've been well fertilized last year, they have, you know, a relatively normal yield the year before. If those vines were super stressed during winter, if those vines had an overcrop last year, and you might be worried that there's some nutrient deficiency, well, that's another thing, and we can talk about that afterward. But this is normal beds. How much? Well, it will depend on your last year's yield and the results of your tissue analysis. Those are the most important things to determine how much you want to put. So there's no magic number. It will depend on your specific conditions, and every bed is going to be different. Just want to point out that phosphorus is something that we always on the watch for. If we can reduce the amount of phosphorus and still get a proper crop, a sustainable, like long-term, we have consistent yields, then go for that. The recommendation based on the work that was done in Stevens is not to put more than 20 pounds of actual phosphorus or 45 pounds of P2O5 per acre. That is based on the work that was done in Stevens. I know that it's different for the hybrids, and especially if you have beds that are, you know, producing over 500 barrels, you might need, if your tissue analysis show that you are over time going down in the concentration of phosphorus. If your tissue analysis shows that you have what is needed, you're between the normal range, there's no reason to put more, okay? And again, the recommendation, and I know that you all know these, prefer blends that have less phosphorus. So, you know, prefer 14, 14, 14 over 6, 6, 6, 24, because that is, if you're going to base your fertilizer on nitrogen and you have higher concentrations of phosphorus in your blend, obviously that's going to increase the amount of phosphorus that you put in that you really don't need. Potassium. And I've said this many times before, potassium will not make your fruit bigger. Potassium is a really important nutrient for fruit size. But if you're within the normal range, you don't need to put more potassium. Potassium is not going to do anything. And I've talked about how potassium competes with calcium, and calcium is the most important nutrient for fruit firmness. So don't go crazy with the potassium, just put what you need. And I'm not going to give any range about how much you need to put in there, because this will depend on your specific bed and the yields that you got in the previous year, how healthy those vines look, and the results of your nutrient analysis. Okay, so beds that have frost patches, and have some areas in which you have low canopy growth. You have, you see, you know, that they're open. You need to fill up that space again. Some of the beds that I've heard that show slow growth, and those that show some Casaron stress. The ones that have frost damage, wait until you see actually new growth before you start fertilizing. And I put spot fertilizing because if you have within a bed certain areas that show damage, I know it's a pain, but it makes much more sense to try to manage those spots individually that increase the entire fertilization rate for the whole bed. So if you have frost patches that you want to recover, wait until you start seeing some new green growth to put some fertilizer. If you put the fertilizer before you see anything, that is not going to encourage new growth. And you're just wasting your fertilizer. So wait until you see growth before you start fertilizing. And for that, in that case, and this is, I know it's a little bit late in the game, but in that case, if you have those patches that show a lot of damage, you can start applying the nitrogen before bloom, obviously, because what you want to do there is really encourage vegetative growth to fill up that space for next year, have a productive area. So in that case, the waiting until, you know, bloom is done to do the first nitrogen application is not applicable anymore. You can start applying a little bit early once you see that green growth starting, that new growth starting. The patches that have slow growth, here's my question to everybody that has this situation. What is limiting this slow growth? Is it really the lack of fertilizer? If you tell me that the vines look really pale and they're slow and they're yellow, well, that could be a possible indicator that fertilizer is the limiting factor. If it's not that, if you just have slow growth, which could be the result of some of the warmer temperatures we had at the very beginning, and then follow up at that cold temperature. And it feels like everything was sort of growth was arrested in general, that pushed it and then stopped. And it feels like a lot of the vines kind of like had a hard time restarting all over again once finally the spring was here. And we've seen this not only on cranberries, but on other fruit crops. And I think that is the result of that warm spell that we had at the end of March. That is not necessarily related with fertilizer. So my recommendation would be, again, watch for drought conditions in that case. I don't think that fertilizer will encourage to get faster growth. Most of the growth and the rate of growth is dictated by temperatures. So if it's very warm and those vines are slow growing, there's something else happening there. And it would not be unrealistic that drought stress, or maybe not enough roots, new roots developing with the heat and the lack of water, will be something that is slowing them down. I just talked about, remembering what nitrogen is mostly for, besides, also supporting vegetative growth and proteins, but most of that nitrogen is going to go into producing chlorophyll at this point. If you have patches that are showing Casaron stress, I think that irrigation is key to be able to get those vines to overcome that stress. And the same recommendation as with the frost, wait until you actually see new growth coming out of those places, or you see that the vines are starting to push new growth before you fertilize. If those vines are stressed by Casaron and you put fertilizer in there, I think you're stressing them more than helping them. What you need to watch for is making sure that they're receiving enough irrigation, and wait. When the vines are ready, they'll start growing, and that's where you encourage more growth with fertilizer. And that's everything I have. But I'm really happy to answer any questions right now. And I have my video off too. What's wrong today with everybody and their videos?
Amaya, I have a question.
Yeah.
If this is a fertilizer uptake question. So if I put out triple 14 today, when is it actually coming available to the plants? If you say we want to get nutrients out there at full bloom, does that mean we kind of have to pre-lead to make sure they're available at full bloom, or do we go wait until full bloom and that's the day we put it out there because it's available immediately?
It's available immediately.
Okay, so as soon as that's, you get it in hours, that night?
Within 24 hours, you're going to have that nitrogen in your leaves. So Sarah Ropo did a really good study many years ago with nitrogen. He used an isotope. So it's nitrogen that has, like a little label, and you can track it. And they put nitrogen applications while, normal conditions. It was warm as it's right now. The vines were growing. And within 24 hours, that nitrogen was already in the leaf of those uprights. So it's really, really fast.
Okay, thank you.
I am still waiting to see any questions come in on the chat. I guess I can refresh my chat, or maybe someone wants to just ask, even say hello to make sure that we know it's working. I don't want to miss any questions that people do have. We've seen bloom progress really, really rapidly throughout the state this year. And I know that people are, chomping at the bit to get that fertilizer out once they see their growth. All right, Stephen says hello, so we know we're there. Do feel free to ask questions. We're gonna have Pam talk about what she's seen and what's coming up, and we will have time for questions for Leslie and for Amaya and for Pam after that. So I hope everyone is wondering and thinking. And if we have, I know it is a more, it's a nice day and there's plenty of things to do. So if you're in the field on your phone, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question that way too. I know it's harder to type in the chat, but we're here and we're happy to talk, including about what you're seeing right now. Pam, do you want to go ahead and share your screen and start your observations? Oh, we do have one question just came in on triple 14. hold on one second. I will, okay. Oh, it's just to my own. Okay, so after starting 14 applications on Stevens, how often should I apply on average beds? How many units are ideal per application?
I would
And I
say
think we're
that,
gauging based on our nitrogen amount,
yeah,
right?
I would say that my recommendation is try not to put more than 20 actual units of nitrogen per application. I feel like that is like, you know, top. I would prefer to go with between, you know, 10 to 15. Reduce that. I know that it's difficult, as we were saying, like try to get all of it, but I think it's better because then you can see how they react and how often you should do it. It will depend on what do you see after the application. So if in 3 days you see that those vines, you did the application, and after 3 days you see that that bed it still needs more fertilizer, you just go back and put the next one that, you know, within 7 days. And then you wait 3 days to see how it reacts to that, and then you go and you apply it again. That would be my recommendation. How much in general? Again, there's no magic number. It will all depend on how they react to what you're putting and your estimated yield based on previous years and what your nutrient analysis show. But I mean, I already think that this, you know, there's such a variability depending on how much fruit those beds will be producing that you need to base it a little bit on your historical data. And this is why it's good to have records of your nutrient analysis, because if you see that those levels are going up, it means that you maybe are putting just too much and you can cut it down. Or if you see that those levels are going down over years, let's say your percentage of nitrogen or phosphorus, potassium, it means maybe that you need to put a little bit more. So sorry that I don't have, I mean, there's no recipe here. It will depend on case by case.
Amaya, when do you suggest, like, maybe is it a February activity to go over your past year's nutrient applications and look at what your long-term trends are, or is that this time of year, or?
This time of the year is already too late. So this is something definitely a winter sort of analysis. Start thinking about what are you going to plan for the following year? Obviously, you know, under the assumption that everything is going to be wonderful, you're going to have a great winter and everything is going to work just fine. But having already a plan and then adjusting based on something concrete is so much easier than during this time where so many things are happening, and you know, making decisions the last minute when you're stressed and anxious about it is always a bad idea in everything in life. So if you can plan in advance, yes, winter will probably be the ideal time to do that.
Okay, I'm just gonna get going into that. If you guys have more questions, just keep putting them in the chat or ask.
People can feel free to ask questions, whether via the chat, or again, if you're out and about in the truck, just go ahead and unmute yourself and ask a question. I don't want to take away anybody's time from our specialists here. And I guess I'll just also ask, Amaya, you've been in cranberries for a while, and Pam, you've been in cranberries for a while. Well, Leslie, this is your first season. How, for any of you, is this the fastest bloom progression you've seen, or have you seen them faster in the past? Oh, good. And then we have a good calcium question after that.
I can answer. So I kind of answered it already, but it was really fast this year. We've had years where it went fast, but I had a few growers call or text and they're like, I am literally watching my blossoms open like that last weekend. And then just being caught off guard with their bees are on their way, but they're not here when they typically have them in place. So I don't know. Yeah, I guess Christelle's not here, but the pollination and how that's all going to play, maybe Amaya can I don't know, is it going, growers are a little nervous, like, is it going to be okay? Like I usually get my bees at 15% or 10%. They didn't come till 30 or peak. How is that going to affect my crop?
Sure, I can talk about that. I think that I have had many other fruit growers, not cranberry growers, ask me the same thing. I think that the problem with the bloom coming so fast is that overall just the flowers decay faster because it's very hot. So the senescence of the flower is faster, and you have a kind of like a shorter period to get that fertilization to happen, to get those bees to pollinate, move that pollen into the stigma, and once the pollen is in the stigma, those pollen tubes are going to grow really fast, and the fruit is going to be set. But it's like, do we have enough time for those bees to visit all of them? And I think that that's probably the concern. Now, even if it's really hot and things go fast, if the vines are well irrigated, and here's again the checking your soil moisture probes and keeping an eye on irrigation. If the vines are well irrigating, even though things are still going to progress fast, I think that really helps keeping those blossoms still viable for a little bit longer. So I would say that that's the biggest recommendation right now, is just to keep irrigating. There's a question about if applying calcium, when is the best time? So there's the question in the chat. Actually, we don't know. This is something that my lab just started working on calcium fertilization and looking at calcium. But I can tell you what we know from other fruit crops, and I think the closest one would be everything that happened in blueberries, because they're almost like sister species with cranberries. And what we do know is that calcium moves in the plant with transpiration flow. So if you take a foliar analysis, you take your tissue analysis, and you take the leaves, and you do an analysis, and you look at calcium, leaves always are going to have a lot of calcium, because the calcium moves through the organs that are transpiring, and the organs that transpire are leaves. That's how the plants keep cool. And so fruits don't transpire a lot. And what we do know on cranberries is that the fruits have very little stomata, which is that those openings in the leaves where the water vapor is being released, and that's how plants transpire. So the fruit has very little stomata, and so that means that there's a very low transpiration rate, which then means that there's very little movement of calcium towards the fruit. The other thing that we know is that those stomata are completely covered with wax by the time that we start seeing some blush on the fruit. So when the fruit starts getting, when it turns kind of white color right before you start seeing some of that red pigmentation happening, during that time, those little stomata are starting to get covered with wax, which means they're sealed and there's no more transpiration, there's no more calcium moving in there. So if I were to bet on something, I would say the sooner you fertilize with calcium once the fruit are set, the better. And so try to put the calcium now, because now's when those stomata are open and the fruit will be transpiring, and some of that nutrient uptake, that calcium uptake, is going to actually be translocated to the fruit. That's where you want it for firmness, and not the leaves. Hopefully in the next 3 years, we're gonna learn a lot about calcium and how it affects fruit firmness, and how we can fertilize, and what's happening with post-harvest and sweet and dry cranberry production when we fertilize with calcium. So stay tuned.
Amaya, do you have a preferred form of calcium to put out?
I mean, anything that is not going to change pH, so calcium sulfate would be a good alternative.
Okay.
Obviously, price plays a role. I don't think you need to do outrageous fertilizations with calcium just to start playing with it. And so if that's the case, if calcium chloride is something that's a little bit cheaper, you could go with that as well. The problem with anything that has chloride, and we talk about this for potassium chloride, is that at some point, if you are putting high amounts of chloride, you will end up with salinity problems.
Yep. Awesome. Appreciate that. We are at 1 o'clock, so unless there are any final questions that come in, I want to thank everybody very much today for joining us on a busy day. Thank you to Amaya for all of your nutrient and fertilizer information. Thank you to Pam for all of the observations of, you know, kind of the whole gamut, and for Leslie for everything with fungicides and fruit rot. Huge thanks to Alex for recording this when I had poor service. Thanks to UW Extension in general, and of course Tom and the Cranberry Growers Association for helping host. I hope everyone has a productive next couple of days, next couple of weeks, because you know these days will really matter. Good to see everyone.